Afternoon, everyone. Very glad to welcome you to another installment of our Lunch and Learn series. We're very pleased to have Devin Brubaker with us today, and he'll be able to lead our discussion as we talk about the most recent legislative session that completed just a couple weeks ago now. By way of introduction, my name's Kyle Butterfield. I'm the past president for the Wyoming Airports Coalition and also on the committee for education and engagement. I don't remember what the specific committee title is, but it centers on ensuring that we engage our membership and provide these opportunities to discuss topics that are relevant and that will help us improve our technical knowledge and also our ability to lead in our communities. I'm really grateful to have you today, and I find these Lunch and Learn sessions very valuable, and I hope you do as well. To introduce Mr. Brubaker, we all know him and are appreciative of his service as our current president for the Wyoming Airports Coalition. He's the immediate past president for our AAAE chapter. Devin is AAAE certified and is the airport director for Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport. He's also engaged heavily with the economic development arms of his county and throughout the state of Wyoming. One of Devin's talents is also staying on top of and tracking legislative matters that impact the state of Wyoming and the airport and aviation industry. And so as we, again, just come off the heels of the 2025 legislative session, it's important that we report back to our coalition on the bills that were passed and the items that will be impactful to us over the next year and into the future. So with that, we'll get things started. And Devin, I'll yield the floor to you and I'll go backstage. Before I do so, I would announce that just for some housekeeping items, please feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar. I'll be monitoring those and have opportunity to either forward those to Devin and answer them in real time, or we'll respond to questions at the end of the webinar. Devin, take it away.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate that. I thought I had our presentation figured out on the back end, and I am learning that it's great on the back end, but in this live environment, I don't have it figured out. So give me one moment here while I figure out how to share my screen properly. And hopefully you all will be able to see it. All right. Are you all able to see that? Kyle, I don't know if you can help me out with I see a raised hand, a couple of raised hands, so I assume that means people are able to see it. Okay. All right, perfect. Then we'll get started here. Appreciate the introduction, Kyle. I'm going to appreciate the opportunity to give a follow-up to our legislative session. Our session, as we'll talk about, was one for the ages and one that will, for a long time, be remembered. Well, at least until next session, when that one will likely replace this one as the one to be remembered. Just a couple disclaimers as we get started on the presentation. The dust is not completely settled yet. The legislature adjourned on March 6th. And the governor has 15 days from when they adjourn to either sign bills into law, let them become law without a signature, or offer vetoes. And so some of that has already happened, but there still are some bills that the governor today and tomorrow still has the opportunity to decide on and make decisions on how they will move forward. Another disclaimer would be that statements made in this presentation are based on the impact to airports and our stakeholders, and not the personal opinions of myself or the members of our Legislative Affairs Committee. It's a difficult thing to do oftentimes when you have to separate your personal political beliefs or moral beliefs or whatever they are from legislation and how we defend the interests of our airports when we tackle these issues. So everything we talk about here is solely based on the impact on airports and not a representation of whether we support an overall theme or not. And then the last thing is we have a great committee, which we'll talk about here in a moment, but we can't guarantee that we addressed every single issue that was in every single bill, but it wasn't for a lack of effort. And I can promise you that the Legislative Affairs Committee really works their tails off to make sure we identify any issues in every bill and get those addressed as best as possible. Speaking of that Legislative Affairs Committee, it consists of myself, Jim Elwood, Glenn Januska, Michelle Anderson, Todd Chatfield, Kyle Butterfield, Brian Olson, and Sherilyn Kaiser. And I want to take an opportunity to special shout out to Brian Olson. As all of you are aware at this point, Brian has moved on out of aeronautics to work within Highway Department at WYDOT. And so he will be stepping aside from this committee, and we'll look forward to welcoming his replacement, the new aeronautics administrator, when they're announced, to join our committee. But his support over the years, I think we all are well aware of the impact that Brian has had on our aviation system across the state, and his impact on our Legislative Affairs Committee is just words can't describe it, and very much appreciated. And then last but not least on the list is Sherilyn Kaiser, who is our public advocate that we hire, that works the halls of the Capitol, works interim committees, works legislators in between meetings, really provides expert recommendations to us on how to proceed with certain legislation, sometimes helps us craft amendments, helps us move amendments, and just really has her ear to the floor in the Capitol and allows us to kind of understand the lay of the land in a better manner. So really appreciate her efforts. Before we dive into the legislative session, I wanted to provide a quick update on a recent trip that your Legislative Affairs Committee made to Washington, D.C. We were there, gosh, I want to say about 3 weeks ago now, maybe it was 4 weeks ago. And while we were there, we focused on some pretty important topics with our delegation and their key staffers. And that included reauthorization implementation, making sure that all of the good success that we were able to achieve in the 2024 reauthorization bill, that we're able to see the FAA actually implement those changes. And it's really important that that happens. I would say that our trip timing couldn't have been better, and I wish we could take credit for that, but it's largely due to Congress not doing their job in a timely manner. But the reality is we were there as appropriations bills were being negotiated, and one of our biggest messages and biggest asks of our delegation was to make sure that in any continuing resolution, full year continuing resolution, that the AIP program was fully funded at the fully authorized level of $4 billion. A typical continuing resolution for the full fiscal year would have meant that it would have stayed at last year's funding level, which would have been 3.35 billion. Through our efforts, through trade association efforts, and through many others' efforts, we were successful in getting Congress to plus up the AIP to the full $4 billion that was authorized in the reauthorization bill. So that was a massive win in the appropriations process. There were some losses there. We didn't get some law enforcement reimbursement program and other TSA funding needs in, but we were able to get the AIP in there. The other thing that we spoke about with them and we continue to work on are nominations and appointments. As many of you are aware, the Trump administration announced their intent to nominate a new FAA administrator this week, the current CEO of Republic Airways. And we are working with Senator Lummis's office on providing comments and questions that she can use during the Senate Commerce confirmation hearings for that appointment. So that's a great opportunity for us to get priorities for Wyoming airports and aviation heard in a committee room with the incoming FAA administrator. We also spoke about the significant amount of grant funding that's being withheld at the federal government right now from our airports. We have at least one airport with over $8 million of funding that they have not been able to secure because of what's going on within the administration. And so we're working through those issues. We also spoke at length about air service and how the EAS program needs to have a fresh look, and we need to make sure that air service in rural America is not forgotten, and that the administration and Congress and others put into place mechanisms to make sure that air service in our communities is protected. And then last but not least, Senator Lummis has been a leader on liability protections for airports when it comes to PFAS. And so we have been continuing to work with her staff to get those bills reintroduced in the new Congress. And we're excited that she is intending to do so and hopefully carry the torch forward where we can get some liability protections for airports across the state that have had PFAS exposure issues. As we jump into the general session for the Wyoming legislature, some summary here. 40-day general session is what's allowed by statute and our Constitution. They only use 37 days, and you'll learn a little bit later what those other 3 days will likely be used for, but the legislature adjourned on March 6th, leaving 3 days available to them for other purposes. There was a total of 556 bills published. 341 of them came from the House, as well as 6 joint resolutions, 198 bills and 11 joint resolutions from the Senate. 227 of the 556 passed both chambers and were sent to the governor for signature. Of those 227, so far the governor, as of last night, has allowed 8 bills to become law without signature, outright vetoed 9 bills, all but 3 which were overruled by the legislature. So when the governor vetoes, the legislature can overrule the veto, and they did so on all but 3 of those 9 bills. And the governor also issued line item vetoes on 4 bills. So the governor's been very active with his red pen this year, and some of his veto letters have been rather scathing on the legislature. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about why some bills were overruled or why they were vetoed, the governor's done a really good job of writing lengthy letters about why those bills are being vetoed. Some key takeaways from the session: there was no supplemental budget, so there was a budget that was introduced, but it did not pass. It did not make it through the Senate. So there was no supplemental budget. I believe this is the first time in the state's history where there was not a supplemental budget made through the general session. So that created a lot of chaos on both floors of the or both chambers of the Capitol, and it resulted in a lot of amendments being made to other bills to try to enact some appropriations into bills where they normally wouldn't be. One of the other key takeaways is the interim committees work diligently with the legislative, the LSO. They work with that organization, and they also work with the constituents of the state and the interests of the state to study topics and study bills. There was 128 committee bills that came out of the interim this last year. 67 of them died. And 15 of those 67 were not even introduced, which is largely unheard of. To have committee bills that are vetted, ran through the public process, to just sit in a speaker or president's drawer is largely unheard of. I would point out that 14 of those 15 that were not introduced were on the House side. The Senate only had 1 bill that was not introduced from the committee. There was a whole boatload of tax bills. There was 46 total tax bills, and there were 67 social issue bills this session. So there was a lot of effort, a lot of energy put towards taxation and social issues. And then if you watched any part of the session, you read any of the media outlets across the state, you will know that there was significant animosity between the chambers, a lot of fighting between the House and the Senate. A lot of disrespect that was sent back and forth between the chambers, and there was a lot of animosity in both chambers between the Wyoming Caucus and the Freedom Caucus, and so that created an atmosphere where it was very difficult to get things done and very difficult to work together to get things done for the state of Wyoming. And I will give credit to Jim Elwood for this last statement. I would definitely agree that this was a weird session, and that is an understatement. Some of the things we saw at the session in the 10 years I've been involved with the legislature, I've never seen anything like it. Name calling, fighting in the hallways, legislators bad-mouthing other legislators openly, to members of the public, whereas that used to be kept behind closed doors when there was disagreements. There was just a lot of weird things happening down there. So how did that impact all of those items impact the coalition? We had 48 total bills that we were monitoring or working. 13 of them we were opposed to. Of those 13 that we were opposed to, only 3 of them passed. We had 21 bills that were in monitor or amend status, and only 4 of those bills passed. And then 14 bills that we were supportive of, and 8 of those passed. So we had pretty good success this session with the 48 bills that we were working, and we'll go over some of those wins and some of the losses that we had as well. Committee activity, it was record year for us. We testified in person or virtually at 24 different committee meetings during the session, and we provided written testimony for 3 different committee meetings during the session. We wrote a total of 9 different amendments for legislation, and we had 7 of those 9 adopted. Other activity we hosted the evening reception at the Cheyenne Regional Airport in February. We had over 50 attendees, including the governor, governor's staff, WYDOT executive staff, Aeronautics Commission and staff. We had representatives from Wyoming Economic Development Association, Wyoming Mining Association, County Commissioners Association, Association of Municipalities, the Wyoming Business Alliance, and many, many more. It was a phenomenal turnout, a lot of great conversation. Really appreciate the Cheyenne Regional Airport hosting us for that. And it's a great venue to do that, and we look forward to doing it again next year. And new this year, we hosted a breakfast at the Capitol. We had over 50 attendees. Of those attendees, over 25 of them were legislators, and they were all walks of life legislators. We had Freedom Caucus, Wyoming Caucus, and Democrats show up, and we had great conversations with many of them. We actually got some of those amendments that we were interested in processed because of some of those conversations we had at the breakfast. We also had the Aeronautics Commission join us, and other stakeholders joined us for that event. So we had 2 great events, and we're able to continue to highlight the importance of Wyoming airports to the state. Diving into some key wins, House Bill 172 was the Repeal Gun-Free Zones bill, also heard or known as the SAPA, the Second Amendment Protection Act bill. This bill would have repealed gun-free zones in the state, and the way it was written, it would have prohibited airports or their governing bodies from limiting firearms in the secured areas of airports. And so we were successful in getting that amendment done, thanks to Larry Hicks from here in Sweetwater County and Carbon County. He helped us get that amendment through. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending what your personal political views are, the bill did pass both chambers with our amendment. However, the governor this week vetoed that bill. So that bill is now dead and will not become law. So our rights to restrict firearms in secured areas of airports still exist because there's nothing prohibiting it or allowing it right now in statute. So we can continue to do what we do today. Senate File 185. I said at the beginning of the session to many of our members that governmental property taxation was likely going to become one of the biggest topics of the session for us. And it absolutely did become the biggest topic. Luckily, it lived a very short life and died. This bill would have required nearly all of our airport property to become taxable, which would have created a tax spiral for at least 37 of our 40 airports in the state. It would have also required us to sell land that we were not using for a governmental purpose as defined by this bill, which would have put us in violation with our federal grant assurances. Us, along with many other stakeholders that would have been adversely impacted by this bill, were successful in getting it killed in the Senate Committee of the Whole with only 6 aye votes for the bill. So we fully expect this to be an interim topic in the upcoming interim. Senate File 65, Data Privacy Government Entities. This bill would have created a whole new statute and policy for government entities to adopt data privacy policies. And it would have limited our ability to utilize data that we collect for numerous things. The way it was originally written would have also limited our ability to comply with Department of Homeland Security requirements. So we were thankful to work with Senator Rothfuss to get the bill amended to protect airport interests. And with that, we were willing and not, I wouldn't say necessarily supportive, but we were in a monitor status on the bill. And once it passed the Senate, it did not get introduced on the House side. So the bill died. Some more key wins. House Bill 72 was a bill regarding protecting women's privacy in public spaces. This bill, and it still does today, it makes government entities liable should a member of the public utilize the wrong facility, the wrong restroom facility, if the government entity does not undertake mitigating efforts to keep that from happening. But there was no definition of what those reasonable mitigation efforts would be. So we worked with the sponsor and we worked with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, really appreciate their partnership. And we were able to get the bill amended to basically state that signage at restrooms designating a bathroom as male or female was adequate, reasonable mitigation efforts. So that bill did pass, but it passed with our amendment, and when I say our amendment, it was a partnership with Wyoming Association of Municipalities once again. So the teamwork there really made a difference. I combined the next two bills together because they both address the same topic. Senate File 111 was a bill that was going to basically kill net metering in the state. We have multiple airports across the state that use energy net metering for solar installations on their airport property. House Bill 183 would have expanded it and allowed for larger systems to be installed. For nearly 8 years now, there's been an effort to kill net metering across the state. And this is the first year where we had a bill to expand it. And the beautiful part of this was that the Senate File 111, which was the bad bill, was killed on third reading in the Senate. And our House Bill 183, not ours, but a stakeholder group that put together House Bill 183 that supported net metering expansion, made it all the way through the House and made it all the way to third reading in the Senate before being amended to death on third reading in the Senate and then dying. But it changed the narrative about net metering across the state, and I'm excited to be part of a task force that's working to come up with a compromise solution during the interim to bring forward to the legislature now that the utilities are somewhat on their back feet, and recognizing that the current legislature is not just going to go with what they want with this legislation. Another bill that's similar in nature is Senate File 183. This was sponsored by Senator Larry Hicks. It would have created a 5-year moratorium on all solar and wind projects across the state. Appreciate Glenn Januska's help with this one. He and I tag teamed it, and we were able to get the bill amended to exclude airports from the moratorium. But the bill ultimately died. But had the bill moved forward, airports would have been allowed to continue with solar and wind development projects, while the rest of the state would not have been able to. We were successful in killing House Bill 262. This was a bill that would have limited the amount of reserves that counties could have on hand. This had an impact on airports because we do have county-run airports across the state. This is the first time I will say that I've ever had to testify on a bill after midnight. It was about 12:15 a.m. When I testified on this bill. It was a bill that the county commissioners opposed, and we opposed, and we were successful in getting that bill killed in that committee meeting. So that was a good win for local governments and airports. The biggest win of the session, and I don't know why I kind of hit it amongst all of them here, was House Bill 33, the Vehicle Sales and Use Tax Distribution Bill. What this did is all of the sales and use tax that the state collects on vehicles was going to the general fund. And what this bill does is it redirects all of that, which amounts to about $70 million a year, to WYDOT starting in 2026. So starting in 2026, WYDOT will have access to 70 million more each year than what they had going into the session, which is a big win. Excuse me. House Bill 36 was a bill that Representative Harshman out of Casper sponsored. This bill was amending the eligibility for Hathaway scholarships to include professional certifications, including things like CDLs, pilot's licenses, airframe and power plant mechanics. And when the bill was originally introduced, it had a provision in it that said that you had to work in the state, and you had to sign a contract with the state to be eligible. That was removed. So for our flight schools and A&P schools that are now or in the future that meet the requirements of Hathaway, those students will now be able to use their Hathaway scholarship money on those programs, which is a big win for our industry and for workforce development. House Bill 86 is a bill that Lloyd Larson out of Fremont County has been working on for years, and we've been working on for years with him. It's a very long bill. It was, I want to say 35 pages long, and a half page of the bill had an impact on local governments and how we did our procurement. The original state statute basically limited anything that didn't require a formal bid. You had to award to an in-state contractor to perform. And there was questions about what happens if there's not an in-state contractor that performs a service, what happens if there's not one that's available, or what happens if there's an emergency situation. And so we were successful in working with Representative Larson to get that bill amended or the language amended in statute to improve the public procurement process, not just for airports, but for all local governments. So appreciate Representative Larson's lead there. Some other wins that I thought it would be good for you all to be aware of is House Bill 214 has instituted into statute the ability for local governments to make electronic payments. So when you're clearing your vouchers each month or each week, as long as you follow the new statute created by House Bill 214, you'll be able to make those payments electronically instead of having to use snail mail and mail checks, if that's your desire. A big desire for this to pass for most entities has to do with some of the check fraud that is happening, where people are intercepting checks and they're able to basically remove the ink off the check and rewrite the check to themselves or change the dollar amounts. And that has become a real issue with paper checks. I'm actually the vice chair of another board that had that happen to our board and has resulted in a criminal investigation, not within anybody in our organization, but a member of the public. Senate File 143, Public Monies, Deposits and Credit Unions. This bill authorizes government entities to invest public dollars in credit unions as long as certain circumstances are met. So that's a great opportunity for especially our rural airports where they may not have a regular bank within close proximity. They may qualify to be able to make their deposits at a local credit union. And then the last one that I wanted to call to your attention is local governments are now allowed to invest in equities as long as they adopt an investment policy that's in compliance with this statute. The state Land and Investment Board or Loan and Investment Board will be creating a draft policy that local governments can adopt for this if they choose to invest in equities. Some of the losses that we had during the session: House Bill 147, it's a prohibition on institutional discrimination. When you read the title, I think most people would say, heck yeah, let's support that. The problem is, as with most bills, it's the devil's in the details. And the way this bill is written, it could have an adverse impact on our airport's ability to comply with Title VI requirements. So it's something we're going to continue to monitor. We had an amendment drafted and submitted, but we were unable to get traction on that amendment. And so the bill passed without our recommended change to protect Title VI requirements. So we'll just have to monitor how this is implemented and how it might impact our federal obligations and how there may be some federal preemption involved. So we're working through what that'll look like as that's rolled out. House Bill 29 was a separate bill that had to do with highway funding. It would have modified the distribution of severance taxes with about an additional $100 million a year going to WYDOT. That bill did not pass, but we did mention earlier House Bill 33 did. So we got half of what we hoped for WYDOT funding there. And I think most people, as long as you haven't been under a rock for the last 6 months, know that property tax, residential property tax in this state has been one of the biggest talking points. Senate File 69 implemented a 25% reduction in value on the first $1 million. And that has a significant fiscal impact on local governments, including cities, towns, counties, and special districts. Anybody that creates a mill levy, has a mill levy that's funding their operation, they're going to see a reduction in revenue starting immediately. And unfortunately, that reduction in revenue is not backfilled anywhere either. So local governments are going to have to find a way to trim, which could have an impact on our airports, because 37 of our 40 airports receive subsidies from their city or county or combination thereof to run their operation. So if the local governments are under fiscal pressure, that means that our airports are going to be under fiscal pressure as well. So what's next? April 8th, the Management Council will meet, and this is where they will take all of the requests from each committee on what they want to study during the interim, and they will make a decision on whether they approve of them or not. Key areas for us is we have 3 different committees that are looking at air service funding, that have an interest in looking at it: the Transportation Committee, the Minerals Committee, and the Appropriations Committee. So we are actively working to make sure Management Council gives adequate time to support that topic. And so we'll be continuing to work on that through April 8th, and then we'll be busy during the interim advocating for air service funding. Other topics that are likely to take up our time during the interim are governmental use property tax. The topic that I mentioned earlier that died in committee of the whole, it will likely come back. And so we need to be prepared to handle that. There is some sense that there's going to be a fresh look at sales tax exemptions. Currently, many of our tenants that either sell or maintain aircraft are the beneficiaries of some sales tax exemptions. And all of the states around us have those sales tax exemptions as well. And should we lose those for our tenants, it could have an adverse impact on our tenants and then the business operations at our airports. There's a lot of interest in looking at how our government entities are funded, things that include sales tax distribution. Currently, 69% of the sales tax goes to the state, 31% goes to local government. There's conversation about changing that distribution. There's conversation about getting rid of direct distribution by fixing how sales tax is distributed. There's conversation about how WYDOT is funded that will be part of. So there's quite a bit of those conversations that'll be happening during the interim. And then fiscal year 27, fiscal year 28 budget, it'll be a budget session. And so that's what we're focused on, as well as making sure that air service funding is included there. And then all of the different agencies that we do utilize as airports or rely on as airports, whether that be WYDOT, the Business Council, or others, that their funding is not adversely impacted. And then, as with every interim, and quite honestly, everything that touches the legislature, there's always question marks. What don't we know that we're going to get hit with? So we're always paying attention to every committee meeting throughout the interim, looking at every piece of proposed legislation to determine if it has an impact on airports. And we're ready to testify or provide written testimony to each of those committees that do have an impact. So what can you do? I know you probably get tired of hearing me say this, those of you that are on this call, but invite your legislator, your local legislators to the airport, talk about your success stories, talk about opportunities, talk about the importance to the community. And I would strongly urge you to focus on who your audience is when you're doing this. Think about using examples of how your airport supports aerial firefighting, how it supports healthcare, whether that's emergency medical evacuation, or that is flying doctors, or whatever it might be, organ transplants, things like that. Focus on agriculture. How is your airport supporting agriculture? Is that predator control? Is that ag spraying? Is it land management and wildlife management? Think about all those different uses that happen at your airport and be prepared to talk about those stories, because that's what's going to resonate with the current legislature. And we need them to be thinking about how airports impact them and impact their neighbors. And these are some of the ways you can do that. I also encourage you to work with your local industry and businesses to help advocate on your behalf. And, we all as airport directors, airport managers, we can spend a lot of time till we're blue in the face talking about how important our airport is. But when our legislators hear it from local industry and businesses, the people that employ our residents, the people that pay the big taxes and fund the government, they're going to listen. Or be more apt to listen at least. So I strongly encourage you to build those alliances in your community. And then the other way that you guys can, what you can do to help out is the economic impact study that WYDOT is funding. I strongly encourage you, if you have not already done so, to get your ADSB system installed. It's an amazing opportunity that the state of Wyoming is paying for us to have these ADSB systems installed and operated at our airports. So encourage you to get it done if you haven't done so. That'll help us collect accurate aircraft utilization data for each airport. Make sure your airport's supporting survey collection. I believe, and if AJ's on, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but every airport should have had access to or should be getting access to their surveys, both for general aviation and commercial aviation. If you're a commercial airport, be sure your users are completing those surveys. Market it, get the word out, help them fill out the surveys, do what it takes to collect that data, because without that data, we can't tell a real accurate economic picture of what's happening in the state. And then the last component is assist in collecting the data for the tenants. So when Wolpert is working on trying to gather the data on your tenants and the employers at your airport, if they're having any issues or challenges, do what you can to help them, because that data is very important as well. And that helps us tell a story and helps us advocate for why aviation and our airports are important to the legislature. And the last slide I have for you is the 2026 budget session. Begins on February 9th, 2026. It's typically a 20-day session, but because the legislature did not use 3 of their days during this year's session, they're able to carry those over to the budget session. So it could be a 23-day session in 2026. The governor's budget is likely to be released around November 17th of this year. And then the Appropriations Committee will get to work on that budget during the months of November and December and into January. And then the last thing I want to highlight is we want to see you there. We want to see you in Cheyenne. We used to do a really good job pre-pandemic of showing up in Cheyenne, having our airports there every day of the session, at least 1 or 2 representatives. And we really want to see more airports get engaged and get involved. And it doesn't just start by coming to Cheyenne. It starts with that previous slide, making sure you're building those relationships back at home. But then those relationships, when they're built and you show up at the Capitol and they see you in the hallway, they're going to be more apt to listen to you, ask you what your concerns are, what they can do to work for you. And we want to see people there. We want to see more participation and get back to the way it was before the pandemic. And the coalition, if you want to get involved and you are concerned about the financial wherewithal of your organization to be able to be down there and doing that, please reach out to any member of the board, reach out to me. We're happy to look at solutions to make sure you can be down there if money is the issue for you or your organization. So, and with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions. I tried to breeze through here pretty quick. Not sure, I haven't looked at the chat here, so okay, just from you, Kyle, but happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I'm going to turn my screen share off. And then take any questions.
Devin, it looks like we've had a couple come in from Mick Pryor. The first is, what do you think the Minerals Committee will address in relationship to airports?
All right, so great question. So what we have asked both, or not just both, Minerals, Appropriations, and Transportation Committee to do is to become educated on the importance of airports, aviation, and air service. The end goal with this interim is to arrive at a governor's budget that includes funding for air service that will make it through the legislature. We have a lot of new legislators, and the goal of getting this in front of multiple committees was that each of those committees would take the time to, when they're studying WYDOT, when they're looking at WYDOT issues, that they also look at aviation issues. And the fact that we got 3 committees that were willing to list us in their priorities is pretty magnificent. and we may not end up in front of all three committees, but it sends a strong message to Management Council that there is a interest across the legislature to study the topic. So every time we can, we like to get in front of these committees and talk about all of our airports, general aviation, commercial service, airports, obviously commercial service airports, we all live off of general aviation as well. My airport, I tell people all the time, I am a general aviation airport with commercial service. We have, 90% of our traffic or 90% of our budget is funded by general aviation. So it's important that we tell the story about general aviation. And really important this session that we secure additional funding for air service in the governor's budget for the next biennium.
Thanks, Devin. We also had another question submitted by Mick Pryor. He said, how do you think the reduction in property tax informs the coming conversation, debate, and funding plan for the commercial air service revenue guarantee?
Well, that's a good question. I think the challenge that we're going to have is when local governments, and Kyle, you're right in tune with this as a city administrator. You sit there and look at, okay, I'm going to take a cut in revenues on at least the residential side of things, and who knows what the other commercial and industrial and oil and gas and those other things for other counties have in terms of their valuation. But if you have an organization that is losing, say, 15% of their budget, they have to cut somewhere. And so you start looking at their budgets, and you have to start looking at, okay, how much are cities, towns, and counties contributing to the local match for air service? How much are they contributing to the operations and capital costs at their airports? And I think all of us are going to feel that pressure. I think all of us are going to feel the pressure of, I think everybody recognizes the importance of commercial air service in our 9 commercial service communities. But at a certain point, there's somebody going to ask the question about funding it. And is that an area we can cut? And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon each of the 9 commercial service communities to make sure that they're having very, very pointed and strong conversations with their community and their local electeds to make sure that the importance of the air service is focused on. And then from the state level, as we're talking to them, if the state's intention, the legislature's intention is to dismantle local funding, then we need to have a conversation with them that if you're not going to provide the local funding resources and revenue generation resources to local governments, then you need to pick up a bigger piece of the tab. And I don't know that that's a successful outcome, but it's part of the conversation that might have to be had should the legislature continue to look at ways that they want to cut revenues to local governments. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, Devin, I think you did a great job, and to bring in additional perspective from maybe local government and city perspective specifically, as the revenue projections tighten for local governments have to look at the core services that they provide. And that can range from police services to public works services to land use services. And I think it's incumbent on all of our members to ensure that local elected officials, whether they're with the municipality, the city level, the town level, or the county level, understand that airports provide a core service to the community, especially from an economic development standpoint. So that is in the commercial service realm, as Mr. Pryor brought up. But our general aviation airports need to ensure that they communicate that message as well, because a 25% reduction for the city of Riverton is going to hurt us. But I know for counties, it's going to be even more dramatic because counties are more dependent upon property tax than they are sales tax, like cities are. And there will be opportunity for county commissioners and other decision makers to prioritize the services that they feel the community needs as they cut the piece of the pie, so to speak, as best as they can. And now's the time to be vocal and to educate so that our elected officials understand that airports are part of the core services. Otherwise, they may be viewed as something that is disposable and not necessarily important to fund. Looks like we have a couple other questions that have come in. A follow-up from Mr. Pryor. It says, do you perceive that these tax cuts put more or less responsibility by our state legislators to aid airport funding in future sessions?
But excellent question, Kyle and Mick. So one thing that I think we are seeing is that the new legislature is very keen on infrastructure investment, and they're willing to use state dollars to invest in infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So I think we have an excellent argument to make for that. Some of the challenge that we do face is there's this perceived notion that airports receive an excessive amount of federal funding by some in our legislature. So we've been doing as best of a job as we can of educating about how that funding is received, how it's funded using the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, and how it doesn't even come close to covering the needs of our airports. So I think we have a better chance than ever, and this plays into Bruce's question that I see popped up on the screen here. Bruce Ransom asked, will the additional $70 million redirected to YDOT from the general budget have a direct impact on our airports and air service? I will tell you it will not have a direct impact, but it will likely have an indirect impact. So one of our challenges is the aeronautics part of the YDOT budget is legislatively controlled. So the dollar amount that's spent by YDOT on aeronautics is capped by the legislature. So for any of that money, that $70 million is specifically allocated to highways. But should YDOT want to use another source of revenue that was funding highways, say the federal mineral royalties, and allocate some of that money to aeronautics, we will need to work with the legislature to modify the CIP funding or the aeronautics budget through the legislative budget process. So we have to balance the timing and the needs. I think we would all agree that we would all love to have more CIP funding at all of our airports. But we also think that if we go and ask for CIP funding and air service funding all in one fell swoop, we might lose the air service funding. And that could create an even bigger issue because the air service funding from the state is that bank account is running dry, and it's running dry very quickly. So should we not be able to get that account replenished, we risk losing the air service in several of our communities. And then when that happens, you also then lose $1.3 million of apportionment or entitlement funding that happens at each of those airports as well each year, which means there's even further tax on the capital improvement plan of the state. So I think it's one of those that the focus is, let's get the air service funding locked in. Let's make sure we can maintain the air service in these communities so that we can maintain the $1.3 million of apportionment money, and we can also obviously maintain the economic impact in each of those communities and the economic value in each of those communities. And then we come back again and work on the legislative budget when it comes to the CIP side of things. There is such a heavy emphasis on YDOT funding from the legislature in a favorable manner right now that there's still the opportunity to tackle aeronautics funding. But if we are leading that charge, I think we lose. If we just make sure we remind legislators that, hey, when you're talking about YDOT, remember it's not just highways, it's also highway patrol, it's also WyoLink, it's also aeronautics, it's also all these other things that you all have asked YDOT to do out of their budget, but there's not been additional funding appropriated. So if you want YDOT to continue to do all these things, then you need to appropriate a level amount of funding or the appropriate amount of funding for each of these tasks and these activities. So I think we can still have that conversation, but we're not the one leading that charge because I don't think we can lead both charges and see success. So we're going to lead the air service charge. And then as YDOT works with the legislature on the infrastructure side, we'll be there to just continuously throw in at each of those meetings. Don't forget about aeronautics. Don't forget about aeronautics. So hopefully that answered Mick's and Bruce's question. Fremont County ate their Wheaties this morning. We're getting a lot of questions from Fremont County.
So far, we don't have any other questions submitted, but we'll hang on the line for a few more minutes. Looks like one just came through from the Jackson Hole Airport Board. Says adding into the chat the annual. Oh, this is a great announcement. And I guess I'll take it since I'm already talking, but folks, please make sure you mark in your calendars that we will have our annual conference in Jackson this year. That'll be October 14th through the 17th. And Mr. Brubaker and the host community have been meeting for several months now to plan this conference. I know they have many great ideas, great topics, and the opportunity to gather together in Jackson will be great, just like all of our conferences are. So please mark it in your calendar, because if you're like me, the conference brings a lot of benefit, not only just from the informational standpoint, but from a networking standpoint with peers in the industry.
Absolutely. Kyle, I might add on that this is our 50th anniversary. 2025 is our 50th anniversary as an organization, so we're going to celebrate big in Jackson. Huge shout out to the Jackson Hole Airport. They're taking an outsized role from what we usually see from a conference host, and they're doing a great job of putting together some great programming. Sounding like we might have one of the biggest opportunities to have a guest speaker we've ever had at one of our conferences. So we're excited for that. Stay tuned for that coming soon. The agenda is already coming into shape. Sponsorship information will be coming out in the next week or so. And then we'll also have registration coming shortly after that. Hotel information was emailed out a couple weeks ago. And what we're hearing from the hotels is that there's been a huge amount of interest in the hotel rooms. There are still plenty available, but they're really thrilled with the advanced bookings. So make sure you get your rooms booked if you haven't done so. We hope to see everybody there. We hope to see a whole bunch of different airports, whether you're a commercial service or a small community airport. We want to see you there. There's going to be topics for both, and we're going to make sure that it's an opportunity for everybody to network and be in good spot. Got a question here, Kyle. It looks like from Mary Olson about any update on federal reimbursement for airport LEOs. So we were successful in getting LEO reimbursement thanks to Senator Brasso's office in the Senate appropriations bill for fiscal year 25. Unfortunately, they never got to an appropriations bill for fiscal year 25. So they passed the continuing resolution, and in that continuing resolution, it carried forward the lack of funding for the airport LEO reimbursement program. There's an effort underway both by Senator Brasso's office and the industry to advocate for that to be in the fiscal year 26 budget. The fiscal year 26 budget that process should have started 3 months ago. And so we are way behind the 8 ball on that. And we got the Congress has a lot of work to do to get a 2026 bill done, but that's going to be one of the areas that we're advocating for, is get the LEO reimbursement program reinstated through TSA. And Senator Barrasso and his staff are leading that effort nationwide on not just our behalf, but our entire industry.
So we'll hang out for a few more minutes here to see if any other questions come in, but I'd like to again thank Devin Brubaker for taking on this Lunch and Learn topic. I'd like to thank his team with the Legislative Affairs Committee. I can't say enough how lucky we are as a coalition to have someone with the talents and energy that Devin Brubaker has. We truly have expertise in our coalition, and we have credibility because of their efforts. And I want to say thank you for that. We've got the state expert, basically, and that's a huge benefit to the airports and every member that we have with the coalition. I'd also like to make reference that if you haven't felt it, there is a shift of culture that we're experiencing right now. We're observing it as it unfolds with our state and federal government. And it seems the tone is to fend for yourselves. And that's right, it's wrong, it's indifferent, but there is a tone that we have to adjust to. And so I would kind of make a plea that the time to be a passive observer is gone, And if you want to advocate for your airport, you want to advocate for the service that it provides for your community, you truly do need to get engaged, because we are so restricted when it comes to fending for ourselves from a financial standpoint. Obviously, we have the ability and, quite frankly, the obligation to charge user fees and to make our airports self-sustaining. But in many of our cases like Riverton, we rely upon our partnerships with local governments, whether that be the county or the city itself. And as cities and counties receive reduced revenue, and also they have such a small role in producing their own revenue, that we have to be engaged in telling our story, again, making sure that people know that we are a core service, but then also reviewing every opportunity we have at our individual airfields to increase usage and increase revenue in any way possible. So be active, be engaged, and the coalition is a great place to network and find that energy and the ideas so that you can represent your individual communities the way that will benefit your community.
Well said, Kyle. I don't know that I could have said it any better. So, great job on that. Thank you again to you and your education committee for putting these webinars on, these lunch and learns. I really love the fact that we continue to see anywhere from 25 to 60 people, depending on the topic and the month, show up at these. It's a great opportunity for our membership. I will get this uploaded. I also know that I think I'm behind on getting some videos uploaded, so I'll make sure I get all of our videos uploaded to our YouTube page, which is linked on our website. If you haven't signed up for membership yet this year, the new membership platform is live. I sent that email out a couple weeks ago. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Jordan up at the Jackson Hole Airport, or Glenn Januska up in Casper. We're happy to help you through the process. It is new. But we're really excited about what that platform will bring. So encourage you to get those memberships in. It allows you then to access things like the recordings from these webinars, our scholarship programs, our professional development programs, and also the discounts to our conference this fall. So encourage you all to jump on those opportunities and get your membership in if you haven't already done so. And I think that's all I have, Kyle.
Thanks again, Devin, and thanks to all that joined. I think we'll conclude this installment of the Lunch and Learn series, and we look forward to gathering next month, and we'll communicate the topic and the date in the near future. Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.